And so he went to Spain and became one of the first volunteers to feel the weight of a pack and a rifle on his shoulder and to physically bar the road to war and fascism as it tried to conquer European civilization. And his account of that struggle, almost unpublished in his own lifetime because of the publishers who wouldn't take it, or the editors who censored it, or the people who wouldn't distribute it. Homage to Catalonia is still the most imperishable account of being both a volunteer and a reporter in a context of war and revolution. And it was while engaged in that struggle, as if he didn't have enough, so to speak, on his plate, that he became aware that there was a third great illusion, or delusion, or hallucination, very prevalent among the intellectuals and those who imagine themselves to be emancipated, rational, and progressive. And this great delusion was the one which stated that beyond the Ural Mountains, in the far distant provinces of Stalin's Russia, a new utopia was being created, where history would come to an end, where human emancipation would be consummated, there would be no more contradictions, and the ideal society would come to birth. And in trying to dispel this hallucination, and also in showing that more than a delusion, more than an illusion, it was a terrible lie and depended upon the suppression or distortion of some appalling truths, Orwell was forced to confront physically, as well as mentally and morally, the consensus of the enlightened, the bien-pensants, who, as some of you may have good reason to know, are always the most intolerant people in society, because they're sure that they're right, and they're sure that their motives must be ideal. And the last decade of his life is therefore spent in an imperishable struggle, conducted almost entirely as an individual, armed really only with a typewriter and an attitude, against the trahison d'éclat, against the betrayal by society and its values, its highest values. So of society and its highest values, by its intellectuals. Now, any of those three things, it seems to me, would be enough for one lifetime. But I must add, before I trespass on your time, which I think I'm about to do, and I have a sense of an unspoken message coming from my I must say why I must briefly say why I think one lone stubborn Englishman was able to do this, was enabled to do it, and I will select the following as my provisional conclusion. With some part of himself, and with his long wrestling with love of literature and of the liturgy, he was a convinced atheist, I think, by the way, a Protestant atheist, but still an atheist. You may know the joke from Belfast about the roadblock. Man gets stopped. Well, what religion are you? Oh, well, I'm an atheist. Are you a Protestant atheist or a Catholic atheist? Actually happened to a Jewish friend of mine in Belfast, and used to make the life of Chinese waiters in Belfast very difficult too in the days of the roadblock. He had a strong belief in the long struggle to have the Bible translated out of Latin, where it was the possession of a priestly class, or, if you prefer the analogy of 1984, of the members of the inner party, a secret book with knowledge arcane and limited to an elite, where it could be read and understood by the people. The long struggle of the Protestant Revolution, where men like William Tyndale were strangled and burned for the right to have a Bible that the congregation could read too. With all these things, he understood intuitively what I think has now been confirmed, shall we say scientifically, that there is a connection between language and truth and logic, that there is innate in us an instinct for language that makes us human, and that along with that comes the wish for clarity and honesty of expression, that it matters, in other words, not what you think. I've just given you 3 examples of how his opinions were the right ones, and that's quite a different thing. Saying or believing the right thing. It's not what you think, it's how you think. It's whether you are willing to trust in what is innate in us in the struggle for liberty and the distrust of lies, the distrust of propaganda, distrust of authority, the lie of authority and the folded lie in the brain, as Auden puts it in his wonderful poem, September 1939. In understanding this, I think, he made it clear that one individual, if possessed of a love of language, an understanding of literature, and a respect for truth, can prevail in a time when the mind is in chains and when people's will to obey, people's willingness to accept coercion has temporarily eclipsed their will to resist. And since it seems to me that we're never likely to reach a time or a place where that example won't be of the first importance to us, and since we happen to be in such a time and such a place now, and since there is so much fear around us and so much propaganda in the language to which we're compelled to listen, that I won't detain you any longer in saying why I think that my title, Why Orwell Matters, is in that extent at least its own justification. So with great gratitude to you for inviting me, and to you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming, I'll place myself at your disposal. Thank you.
Christopher Hitchens, journalist and author of Why Orwell Matters, for his comments here today. I'm Connie Shapiro, president of the Commonwealth Club, and I will conduct the question and answer section of this program. We have many questions, so if you would step back up here, I will begin. What would Orwell write about today?
Well, I would have thrown that one out because can I winnow the rest of them? No, I'm just kidding. Well, I think I began by saying what I thought he would already have known and would have hoped to make plain to others about the survival into our time of the party state, of the idea of the leader-worshipping, centrally organized, regimented society, economy, and political system, and how the existence of such regimes is not just a tragedy for those who live under them, but a menace to those who live alongside them or have to temporarily to coexist with them. I think that that he would have noticed that, and I think he would have noticed in his struggle for truth and language that I was just mentioning, probably the best known lesson that he taught, and the one that people have assimilated the best, is the attack on euphemism. Pretty names for ugly things, in other words. Thus, I suppose the contemporary classic would be collateral damage as a word for dead civilians. Most people I know, I'm very pleased to say, when they hear a trick like that attempted to be pulled on them, will reach for their Orwell. Somewhere in themselves they know he put them on alert for a thing like that. Of course, they're often not as alert to it in their own discourse. For example, facile anti-war people now say no war on Iraq or no war with Iraq. Well, that sounds okay, but since the argument is should there be a fight with Saddam Hussein, it's doing no favor to the Iraqi people to say that Iraq is Saddam or Saddam is Iraq. After all, that's the proposition the Iraqi people were asked to validate in a 100% referendum last week. So people who say Iraq when they mean Saddam Hussein are doing his work for him and should be aware of it. So it's one thing to be aware of the lies that power tells in surreptitious propaganda, but one must also be aware of the facile or evasive things that one is inclined to say or let be said oneself.
Do you feel, as Orwell did in his time, that the very concept of objective truth is fading out of the world?